Imagine this. The year is 1738. Deep in the swamps of Spanish Florida, a man runs through water up to his waist. Behind him, bloodhounds, slave catchers. The plantation he escaped from lies 200 miles north in the Carolina colony. He's been running for weeks, sleeping in trees, eating whatever he can find. His feet are torn, his body's exhausted, but he cannot stop, because if they catch him, they will kill him. The water grows deeper, the cypress trees close in, and then voices, not English, not the language of his captors. Muskogee, Creek, Hitchiti. He's found the Seminoles, and everything is about to change. Over the next century, thousands of escaped slaves would make this same desperate journey, fleeing bondage in Georgia, the Carolinas, Alabama, running toward the one place in North America where they might be free. Florida, Spanish Florida, where the Seminole people, themselves refugees, outcasts from Creek nations to the north, had built a new society in the wilderness. And when those escaped slaves arrived, something remarkable happened. The Seminoles didn't return them, didn't enslave them. Instead, they welcomed them, gave them land, let them build towns, form families, live. In return, these black refugees adopted Seminole customs, learned their languages, fought alongside them, and together they created something that had never existed before in North America. A free multiracial nation in the heart of slave territory. They called themselves the Black Seminoles, and their story of resistance, survival, betrayal, and an epic journey that would eventually lead them to Texas is one of the most remarkable in American history. This is that story. To understand the Black Seminoles, you have to understand both halves of their identity. The Seminoles themselves were relative newcomers to Florida. The name Seminole comes from the Creek word Seminole, meaning wild or runaway. They were Creek people who had broken away from the Creek Confederacy in Alabama and Georgia during the 1700s, moving south into Spanish Florida to escape colonial pressure. They were farmers, hunters, traders. They built villages along rivers and in hammocks, raised patches of dry land in the swamps. They raised cattle, grew corn, and lived by their own laws. Florida at that time was Spanish territory, and Spain had a policy. Any slave who escaped from the British colonies and reached Florida could claim sanctuary. Convert to Catholicism, and you were free. So they came. By the dozens, by the hundreds. African men and women who had been enslaved on rice plantations in South Carolina, cotton fields in Georgia, sugar estates in the Caribbean. They made the dangerous journey south, through forests and swamps, hunted by slave patrols and dogs. And when they reached Seminole territory, they found something unexpected: acceptance. The Seminoles had no tradition of race-based slavery. They had captives from wars, prisoners who might be adopted or ransomed. But the idea of owning someone for life based on the color of their skin, that was a European invention. So when the escaped slaves arrived, the Seminoles made a deal. You can live here. You can farm, build towns, raise families. In return, you'll give us a portion of your crops each year. And if we go to war, you'll fight with us. It wasn't equality, not by modern standards. There was a hierarchy. Seminole leaders held authority, but compared to the plantations these black refugees had escaped from, it was freedom. Over time, the two communities blended. Black Seminoles learned Muskogee and Hitchiti. They adopted Seminole dress, turbans, long shirts, colorful patterns. They intermarried. Children were born who were both African and Seminole, both black and native. They built towns with African-style architecture. Wooden houses with thatched roofs arranged around central plazas. They grew African crops, okra, black-eyed peas, rice. They told African folktales mixed with Seminole legends. And they created a new culture, unique, resilient, free. By the early 1800s, there were dozens of Black Seminole towns scattered across northern Florida. Thousands of people, thriving communities, proof that another way of life was possible. But the United States had other ideas. In 1819, Spain ceded Florida to the United States. Suddenly, these free black communities were under the jurisdiction of a slaveholding nation, and southern plantation owners wanted them back. Slave catchers crossed into Florida demanding the return of fugitives. They didn't care if those fugitives had been free for decades. Didn't care if they had families, farms, and entire lives built in Florida. To the plantation owners, they were property, and property needed to be recovered. The Seminoles refused to hand them over. And so began the Seminole Wars, 3 brutal conflicts spanning nearly 40 years. And at the center of these wars were the Black Seminoles. The First Seminole War, 1817 to 1818, Andrew Jackson, then a general, invaded Florida with orders to suppress Seminole resistance and recover escaped slaves. His army burned villages, destroyed crops, and killed anyone who resisted. The Black Seminoles fought back fiercely. They knew what awaited them if they were captured. Chains, whippings, sale, separation from their families. So they fought with a desperation that shocked American soldiers. They used guerrilla tactics, ambushes, hit-and-run attacks, disappearing into the swamps. They knew the terrain. They could move through water and jungle that exhausted American troops. And they had everything to lose. One American officer wrote, "The Negroes were the best fighters. They would die before surrendering." But they couldn't win. Not against the United States military. The war ended in 1818, with Florida devastated and the Seminoles forced into a fragile peace. The Second Seminole War, 1835-1842. Worst was yet to come. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. All native peoples east of the Mississippi River would be forcibly relocated to Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma. The Seminoles were ordered to leave Florida, and the Black Seminoles, they were told they'd be returned to slavery. In December 1835, a group of Seminole warriors led by Osceola ambushed and killed a U.S. Indian agent who had been pushing removal. It was the spark that ignited the Second Seminole War. The Black Seminoles joined the fight immediately. Leaders like Abraham, a Black Seminole who served as interpreter and advisor to Seminole chiefs, organized resistance. John Horse, a young Black Seminole warrior who would later become legendary, fought in some of the fiercest battles. The war lasted 7 years. It was brutal, chaotic, and expensive, costing the U.S. government over $40 million and the lives of over 1,500 soldiers. The Seminoles and Black Seminoles used the swamps as their fortress. They built hidden camps. They launched raids and vanished. They refused to surrender. American generals tried everything. Bribes, negotiations, treachery. In 1837, General Thomas Jessup invited Osceola to peace talks under a white flag and then arrested him. Osceola died in captivity. It was a betrayal that enraged both Seminoles and Black Seminoles, and it hardened their resolve. But eventually, exhaustion and starvation took their toll. By 1842, most Seminoles had been captured or agreed to relocate west. Thousands were marched at gunpoint toward Indian Territory. Among them, hundreds of Black Seminoles. They were promised they'd remain free. They were promised land in the West. Like so many promises made to them, these would be broken. The Third Seminole War, 1855 through 1858, saw the last holdouts in Florida finally subdued, while John Horse traveled back from Mexico trying to broker peace. The journey to Indian Territory was hell. Thousands of Seminoles and Black Seminoles were forced to march over 1,000 miles. Men, women, children, the elderly. Many were sick. Many died along the way from disease, exposure, starvation. It was a death march. The Seminoles called it the Trail of Tears, just like the Cherokee before them. When they finally arrived in Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, they were settled on land promised to the Creek Nation. The Creeks, their old enemies. The very people the Seminoles had fled from generations earlier. Tensions were immediate, and the Black Seminoles faced an even worse problem. Slave raiders. Creek leaders, some of whom owned slaves themselves, argued that the Black Seminoles were property. They claimed ownership over him, and Creek slave catchers, backed by U.S. authorities, began hunting Black Seminoles, dragging them back into bondage. The U.S. government did nothing to stop it. In fact, some officials encouraged it. The promise of freedom? Forgotten. The Black Seminoles realized they were not safe here. They had fought for decades, survived wars, betrayals, forced marches, and now they were being re-enslaved. So they made a decision. They would leave. Again. And this time, they would head south. To Texas, and eventually to Mexico. In 1849 and 1850, led by Wildcat and John Horse, several hundred Black Seminoles and Seminoles made a mass exodus from Indian Territory, crossing Texas to reach Mexico. It wasn't easy. Texas was still a frontier, lawless, dangerous, filled with hostile forces. Comanche and Apache warriors controlled much of West Texas. Mexican and American armies clashed along the border. Slave catchers operated freely. But Texas also offered something. Opportunity. The U.S. Army needed scouts. The frontier was vast, and the soldiers stationed there had no idea how to navigate it. They couldn't track. They couldn't read the land. They couldn't survive in the desert. The Black Seminoles could. They had spent generations in the swamps of Florida. They knew how to track game, how to read signs, how to move silently through hostile territory. They were expert marksmen, riders, and fighters, and they made the Army an offer. Hire us as scouts. Give us land. Protect our families from slave catchers, and we'll help you fight the Comanche and Apache. The Army agreed. In 1870, the U.S. Army officially enlisted a company of Black Seminole scouts at Fort Clark near Brackettville, Texas. They were led by John Horse, now in his 50s, a legendary figure who had fought in the Seminole Wars and led his people across half a continent. The scouts were phenomenal. They could track a single horse across miles of rock and desert. They could predict where a raiding party would strike. They could survive on almost nothing. A handful of mesquite beans, water from a cactus. And in combat, they were fearless. One Army officer wrote, "These men are the finest trackers I have ever seen. They can follow a trail that is invisible to the white man, and they fight with a courage that is unmatched." For nearly 30 years, the Black Seminole Scouts served on the Texas frontier. They fought in over 24 engagements. They rarely lost a man, and 4 of them earned the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. But despite their service, they were still treated as second-class citizens. The relationship between the Black Seminoles and the U.S. military was complicated. The Army valued their skills. Generals praised them. Officers requested them specifically for dangerous missions. But the institution didn't respect them. Black Seminole scouts were paid less than white soldiers. They were denied the land they had been promised. Their families were harassed by slave catchers and racist locals, and when they protested, they were ignored. Local civilians and slave catchers, sometimes backed by Texas authorities, harassed and threatened them. The Rangers, suspicious of armed free black men, kept a wary eye, but never engaged in open combat. The Black Seminoles knew they were never truly safe in Texas, despite their service, despite their sacrifices. They were black in a state that still operated under the shadow of slavery and segregation. And so, many of them made a final decision. They would cross the border into Mexico. In the 1850s, a group of Black Seminoles, led by John Horse and the Seminole Chief Wildcat, Coacuchi, crossed the Rio Grande into Mexico. They had been invited. The Mexican government, dealing with Apache raids in northern Mexico, needed experienced fighters, and the Black Seminoles were the best. Mexico offered them what the United States never had: land, freedom, and citizenship. In 1852, they founded a settlement called Nacimiento de los Negros, birthplace of the blacks, in the state of Coahuila, about 125 miles southwest of Eagle Pass. It was a small town, adobe houses, farms, a church, but it was theirs. The Black Seminoles thrived in Mexico. They raised crops. They defended the border from Apache raids. They built schools and taught their children to read in English, Spanish, and Muskogee, and they were free. For the first time in generations, they didn't have to fear slave catchers, didn't have to worry about being dragged back into bondage. They could live openly, proudly, as who they were. John Horse became a hero in Mexico. He led military expeditions, negotiated treaties, and when he died in 1882, he was buried with full military honors. But even in Mexico, life was not easy. The land was harsh, water was scarce. The Mexican government, while more accepting than the U.S., still treated them as outsiders. And many Black Seminoles missed Texas. It was complicated. Texas had been cruel to them, but it was also home. So some returned. They settled near Brackettville, Texas, close to Fort Clark. Their descendants still live there today. Let's talk about the 4 Black Seminole scouts who earned the Medal of Honor, because their stories deserve to be told. Sergeant John Ward, April 25, 1875. A cavalry detachment was ambushed by Comanche warriors in the Pecos River Canyon. The soldiers were pinned down, taking heavy fire. Ward, serving as a scout, charged into the fight. He held the line, allowing the soldiers to retreat. He was wounded but refused to leave until every man was safe. Private Pompey Factor, April 25, 1875. Same battle. Factor was shot in the leg but kept fighting. When a soldier fell wounded, Factor ran into open fire, dragged him to cover, and held off the attackers until reinforcements arrived. Sergeant Isaac Payne, April 25, 1875. Payne's horse was shot out from under him. He fought on foot, holding off Comanche warriors while the cavalry regrouped. He was credited with saving multiple lives. Private Adam Payne, awarded for actions in 1874 and 1875, same campaign as the others. These men were heroes, but their medals were not presented with fanfare. No parades, no newspaper headlines. They were quietly given their awards and sent back to work, because they were black. And in 1870s Texas, black heroes were inconvenient. Today, descendants of the Black Seminoles still live in Texas and Mexico. In Brackettville, Texas, there's a small community known as the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery. It's where many of the scouts and their families are buried. Every year, descendants gather there to honor their ancestors. They hold ceremonies, tell stories, keep the culture alive. The language, a unique blend of English, Spanish, Muscogee, and Gula, is still spoken by a few elders. Linguists have recorded it, trying to preserve it before it disappears entirely. The traditions, food, music, storytelling are passed down through families. Dishes like sofki, a traditional Seminole corn soup, are still made. Songs in Muscogee and Afro-Seminole Creole are still sung, but it's a struggle. The community is small. Many young people have moved away. The language is fading. The stories are at risk of being forgotten. And for decades, the Black Seminoles were largely erased from Texas history. The Texas Rangers got monuments. The Cowboys got museums. But the Black Seminole Scouts, who served with distinction, who fought for Texas, who earned medals of honor, were barely mentioned. It's only in recent years that historians have begun to tell their story, to recognize their contributions, to demand that they be included in the narrative of Texas, because they're part of Texas. As much as the Rangers, as much as the Cowboys, as much as anyone. So what does the story of the Black Seminoles teach us? It teaches us about survival, about resilience, about people who refused to be defined by what the world tried to force on them. The Black Seminoles were escaped slaves. But they didn't just escape, they built. They created communities, families, a culture that blended African, Seminole, Spanish, and American influences into something entirely new. They were told they would be re-enslaved. So they fought. For decades, across multiple wars, against overwhelming odds, they were betrayed repeatedly by the Spanish, by the Americans, by their supposed allies, but they kept going. They were forced to march 1,000 miles, and when they got to Indian territory, they were hunted again. So they left. Again, they crossed into Texas, into Mexico, built new lives in new places, and when Texas needed them, when the U.S. Army needed them, they served. With honor, with distinction, and they were repaid with discrimination, broken promises, and erasure, but they survived. And their descendants are still here. That's the lesson. Not that justice always wins, not that perseverance is always rewarded, but that people, when pushed to the edge, can endure, can adapt, can survive. The Black Seminoles are proof. There's a phrase in the Black Seminole community: we carry the fire. It comes from their history, from the nights spent running through swamps, carrying torches to light the way, from the campfires in Florida where escaped slaves and Seminoles shared food and stories, from the fires they built in Indian Territory, in Texas, in Mexico, fires that kept them warm, kept them fed, kept them alive. The fire was survival. The fire was resistance. The fire was hope. And that fire is still burning. In Brackettville, Texas. In Nacimiento, Mexico. In the hearts of the descendants who remember, who tell the stories, who refuse to let their ancestors be forgotten. The Black Seminoles are part of Texas, part of the fabric of this state. They fought for it, bled for it, earned medals of honor defending it. And for too long, we didn't honor them back. But we can change that. We can tell their story. We can teach it in schools. We can build monuments. We can say their names. John Horse, Abraham, John Ward, Pompey Factor, Isaac Payne, Wildcat. These names matter. These lives mattered. And their descendants, still carrying that fire, deserve to be recognized. This is Texas. And Texas is bigger than one story. It's cowboys and Tejanos and Germans and Czechs and Vietnamese and Somalis and yes, Black Seminoles. It's all of us. Every story, every struggle, every triumph. And the more we know those stories, the better we understand who we are. So remember the Black Seminoles. Remember their journey from slavery to freedom, from Florida to Texas to Mexico. Remember their courage, their resilience, their refusal to give up, because they are us, and we are them. And the fire they carried, it's ours now, to keep burning, to pass on, to never let go out. If you want more stories like this, stories that expand what we think we know about Texas, that challenge us, that remind us how rich and complicated our history really is, hit that like button and subscribe to Texas Tales. Because history isn't just about the past. It's about understanding the present and building a future where every story, no matter how long it's been buried, finally gets told. Thank you for watching. And remember, we carry the fire.